Welcome back. In this video, we will explore the aggregate demand aggregate supply model. Today, we will cover macroeconomic equilibrium, the impact of changes in ADAS on income levels, and the ADAS model's role in the business cycle. First, let's demonstrate macroeconomic equilibrium using the ADAS model. Macroeconomic equilibrium is a condition in the economy in which the quantity of aggregate demand equals the quantity of aggregate supply. The classical ADAS model is an expansion on the regular demand and supply model. The elements of a classical ADAS model consists of price level, inflation, is on the y-axis, real GDP, or economic activity, on the x-axis, the aggregate demand line represented by a downward curve. The upward curve is short-run aggregate supply line, representing the current level of aggregate supply being achieved by the economy, and the long-run aggregate supply line represents the economic capacity. In short-run equilibrium, the economy finds a balance where AD equals SRAS. However, in disequilibrium, prices adjust automatically until equilibrium is restored. This graph illustrates the long-run macroeconomic equilibrium where the AD and SRAS curves intersect at the potential GDP level, when the current output is equal to potential output. At this point of equilibrium, the economy is producing at a full employment rate. This suggests that the unemployment rate is at the natural rate, and economy is operating with full capacity and producing the potential outputs. However, increasing aggregate demand will not increase output as all resources are already employed. This will only result in inflation as there will be increased competition for resources, requiring firms to offer higher prices to accumulate scarce resources, such as labor. There are three types of macroeconomic equilibrium: below full employment, and above full employment, each with distinct characteristics. When the economy is operating below its full employment equilibrium, the economy is producing less than full employment output and is in a recession. Another way of saying this would be that the economy is experiencing a negative output gap where actual output is lesser than its potential output. This reflects unemployment of resources, including labor, meaning there is still spare capacity within the economy. Besides, lower output and income also means there is less pressure on prices in the economy. Above full employment equilibrium is the point where SRAS and AD intersect. This means that the economy is producing more than potential output. This reflects unsustainable utilization of resources. Increases in AD will cause increases in price level and no change to real GDP. High level of output and income also means there is greater pressure on prices in the economy. Now, let's take a look at the Keynesian model. The fundamental difference between classical ADAS economists and Keynesian economists is that classical economists believe changing factor or resource prices such as wages or cost of production can cause a shift in SRAS and allow the economy to self-adjust to the long-run equilibrium. The Keynesian S curve is divided into three stages: Keynesian, intermediate, and classical, reflecting different economic conditions. The Keynesian zone occurs at low levels of output on the aggregate supply curve where it is fairly flat, so movements in aggregate demand will affect output but have little effect on price level. This occurs when economy is in recession or contraction. The intermediate zone in the middle of the S curve is upward sloping, so a rise in aggregate demand will cause higher output and price level, while a fall in aggregate demand will lead to a lower output and price level. The classical zone occurs at the right of the S curve where it is fairly vertical, so movements in aggregate demand will affect the price level but have little impact on output. Equilibrium in the Keynesian model can occur at any point when AD equals S, with government interventions adjusting AD to maintain balance. The Keynesian economists believe the economy does not self-adjust because wages and other resources prices are inflexible. Therefore, the supply side of the economy, especially the government, must ensure markets are sufficiently competitive to raise the aggregate supply in order to stimulate aggregate demand. This can be achieved through raising the government expenditure, lower taxes, lower interest rates, and etc. The increase of AD shifts AD curve to the right and subsequently moves the equilibrium rightward, resulting in greater real GDP. The Keynesian S curve shifts inward or outward due to changes in production costs and capacity, affecting real GDP. Next, we will demonstrate the impact of changes in ADAS on income levels using the ADAS model. Economy equilibrium can be disturbed by demand-side or supply-side shocks, leading to changes in AD and short-run aggregate supply. Higher prices for inputs that are widely used across the entire economy cause negative supply shock, leading to decrease in short-run aggregate supply. Some real-life examples include border closure during COVID-19 pandemic, exhaustion of natural resources, natural occurrences. In many cases, a shock will affect both AD and IS, leading to movement of macroeconomic equilibrium that brings a set of effects such as reduced GDP causes recession, higher unemployment and higher inflation. The neoclassical model assumes that resource market shortages lead to price adjustments. Competition for scarce resources increase cost of production, and thus affects the willingness to supply. And the economy's capacity is independent of price levels. An economy's capacity to produce goods and services in the long run is driven by factors that are independent of price level variations, making the LRAS curve vertical and price level relevant to determining potential output. Meaning, as long as resources are available for production, the changes in price would not affect the economy's capacity to produce. Think of it like a car engine. How fast the car can go depends on the engine's power, not on the price of fuel. Long-term economic growth occurs as long-run aggregate supply and short-run aggregate supply shift to the right, driven by increased resources, productivity, market efficiency, better infrastructure, simple and lower taxation, discoveries of new resources, and etc. Right shift of both curves lead to greater economic capacity, hence level output rises and puts downward pressure on the price level. When AD shifts, it affects the economic capacity and price levels, leading to changes in short-run aggregate supply and overall economic equilibrium. Increases in AD will cause the equilibrium level of real GDP to rise, and sometimes beyond the potential output. This causes cyclical unemployment to fall but put upward pressure on price level. This is when inflationary gap exists. However, due to shortage of resources, short-run aggregate supply decrease and price level increases. As a result, purchasing power falls, leading to decline in aggregate demand, and AD curve shifts upward to coincide with long-run aggregate supply. A recessionary gap occurs when the economy operates below full employment, leading to lower price levels and output. This can happen when there is a decrease in AD. In contrast, an inflationary gap happens when the economy operates above full employment, causing higher price levels and output due to declining productive capacity. Negative supply shocks can lead to stagflation, a combination of recession and inflation, and elevated unemployment, affecting overall economic stability. This will end up with stagnant economic growth. Let's move on to see how the ADAS model helps explain the business cycle, showing how economic activity fluctuates over time. This graph illustrates the relationship between the ADAS model and the business cycle, highlighting periods of expansion and recession. Negative output gaps occur when an economy is producing less than full employment, while positive output gaps exist when an economy is producing more than full employment output. The economic cycle has phases of highest and lowest activity, with corresponding impacts on price levels and real GDP. At point B, an economy is said to be at full employment equilibrium, producing the potential output. In a recession, the short-run equilibrium is well to the left of the LRAS. At point A, it is a period where the level of economic activity is low and output gap is large. In an upswing, the short-run equilibrium is also to the left of the LRAS. Expansions occur as a result of positive demand or supply shocks, which cause the initial equilibrium level of real GDP to rise towards, and sometimes beyond potential GDP, especially during the late upswing, as occurred at the equilibrium point C. As GDP rises, cyclical unemployment falls. It is a period where the level of economic activity is high and there the negative output gap is getting smaller and closer to the full employment LRAS. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for the next episode, where we will dive deeper into economic models and theories.